Howdy, y'all. Welcome back. Today, we are going to take a deep dive into what is considered to be the oldest continuously occupied settlement in the entire United States of America, St. Augustine, Florida. According to the current narrative, St. Augustine was a fortified city with multiple store forts, including Fort St. Marcos and Fort Caroline, and it was always under contention. It was always involved in some sort of battle throughout the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. And what we find within the ancient walls of St. Augustine is nothing short of spectacular. When we dive into these images, something to keep in mind is look at the infrastructure and the larger fortifications. We have what appears to be a massive and ancient, dilapidated, crumbling city wall that appears to go around the entire outskirts of the city, but also on the street level. We can see that many of the buildings appear to have a lower level that is the same sort of ancient, crumbling architecture as the rest of the outskirts of the city walls. And we can also see that there's reinforcement in a lot of the streets and on the seawall of St. Augustine. We find the same sort of architecture that appears to be hundreds of years old. But in the first photographs from 1865, you will see that the structures on top of this foundation are all rather rudimentary. They're all rather basic. They are made of wood and simple structures like that, at least most of the time. So what we see is some sort of advancement that occurred hundreds of years ago, some sort of infrastructure foundation of St. Augustine that appears to have been set up many, many years ago. But throughout the centuries, up until the advent of photography, we have rather simple buildings being constructed on top of the rather advanced masonry. And then from 1865, which is the time of the first photographs that we'll be looking at in this video, through the year 1900, St. Augustine becomes transformed from this small but fortified community with different little pockets of fortifications, different star forts. It gets transformed from that into a massive hotel hub, one of the largest hotel cities in all of the United States of America. So that's something to keep in mind as we dive into these photographs. According to the current narrative, the first European explorer to land foot on St. Augustine did not occur until roughly the 1560s. However, the first to discover, quote-unquote, this landscape is credited as being the governor of Puerto Rico at that time, Juan Ponce de Leon. This occurred in roughly the 1500s, the early 1500s, but is mostly speculative, as historians say they believe that Ponce de Leon traveled as far north as St. Augustine. However, the only fact that's believed by nearly all historians to be concrete is that Ponce de Leon claimed the entire area of Florida for the Spanish, believing it to be an island. It wasn't until 1565, many decades later, that Pedro Menendez de Avilés officially founded St. Augustine. And here is where we get to another interesting little tidbit about this narrative. We're told that Pedro Menendez was part of what was called the treasure fleet of the Spanish Armada, which was tasked with traveling to the New World to capture riches from the kingdoms that could be found there. In competition with the Spanish at that time were the French Huguenots, who were looking to do the same thing, establishing settlements and looking to claim indigenous riches and the, quote, lost riches of the New World as their own. We're told St. Augustine was named after St. Augustine of Hippo, whose feast day was the same day that the Spanish Armada first sighted land. This was said to have occurred on August the 28th, 1565. We're told the indigenous people of St. Augustine at this time were rather unique. When they first encountered the Spanish, they brought the Spanish back to their settlement, and we're told that these indigenous people lived in massive domed homes, the largest of which was said to have belonged to the chief. It contained a moat made out of masonry, and this entire massive home, this massive dome, was said to have been gifted to the Spanish. But read between the lines. We're told this dome could hold several hundred people comfortably. Now, the French, around this same time period, had tried to establish a star fort of their own, roughly 30 miles away, known as Fort Caroline. However, this created much conflict between the French and the Spanish, as the Spanish were Catholic and the French Huguenots Lutheran. So there was turmoil that was not resolved until we're told the Spanish actually sided with the indigenous people and they worked together to defeat and expel the French from the area. We're told following a few decades of this peace between the Spanish and the indigenous people of the St. Augustine area, this landscape was then repeatedly attacked by English pirates, including the famous English pirate Robert Surley. These engagements and these skirmishes between the English and the Spanish continued for many years, with the Spanish maintaining control of St. Augustine throughout the conflicts. In 1738, the governor of Spanish Florida ordered that a new community be created 2 miles north of St. Augustine to house all of the freedmen from the northern colonies who had escaped to Florida. This was known as Fort Mose. In 1763, the Treaty of Paris signed over control of Florida from the Spanish to the British, and we're told in this narrative that the British then proceeded to remove all people of Spanish, indigenous, French, Moorish, or African origin from St. Augustine. After this mass exodus, the British then looked to repopulate the city. The 1783 Treaty of Paris, however, reorganized St. Augustine. It recognized American independence, and it ceded all of Florida back to the Spanish. From 1783 through roughly 1821, Florida and St. Augustine in particular became the target of the French, including Napoleon's army. We're told after a massive hurricane in 1811, most of St. Augustine was destroyed. And in 1819, a treaty was formed, which was ratified 2 years later in 1821, which ceded Florida and St. Augustine to the United States of America. We're told by the year 1840, the population of Florida was well over 54,000 people, and over half of this 54,000 were enslaved people. Keep that in mind as we dive into these details. In 1845, Florida officially became a state, and on January 7th, 1861, one of the first actions considered part of the Civil War was when Fort Marion or Fort St. Marcos, nearby to St. Augustine, was sacked by a group of over 125 future Confederate soldiers under direct orders from Robert E. Lee. We're told the Star Fort was stripped of all of its weaponry and technology, which was then shipped further north to aid the Confederate Army. By 1862, St. Augustine had returned to Union control. By 1883, Henry Flagler had moved to St. Augustine to make it his home of enterprise, and he envisioned a massive increase in the architecture and the population and the overall aesthetic value of St. Augustine. Henry Flagler was one of the co-founders of the Standard Oil Company alongside Rockefeller, and Flagler was one of the richest men in America. Flagler brought the railroad system to Florida and directly to St. Augustine, and he also constructed what were at the time 2 of the largest hotels in history, transforming the landscape of St. Augustine into one of the vacation hubs of America. Now, before I chime out, I wanted to give you a little bit more information on the 2 hotels that were created by Henry Flagler in the late 1880s. One being the Ponce de Leon Hotel, which has been a mainstay throughout the photographs we've been looking at today and still exists in St. Augustine. This hotel was apparently built from 1885 through 1887 exclusively in the Moorish Revival architectural style. We're told the Ponce de Leon was the first hotel in recorded history to be constructed entirely out of poured concrete, and it was also the first hotel in recorded history to have wired electricity from the onset, which was supplied by Flagler's close friend, Thomas Edison. The interior of the Ponce de Leon was designed by Tiffany & Company, and the Ponce de Leon was also apparently the founding headquarters of the U.S. Coast Guard Reserves, which happened during World War II. The other hotel of note Also created by Flagler, completed in 1887, was the Alcazar Hotel, which is now home to the Leitner Museum. Built in the exact same Moorish Revival architectural style, the Alcazar had a steam room, a massage parlor, sulfur baths, a gymnasium, a 3-story ballroom, and at the time it was completed, the world's largest swimming pool. However, after years as an elegant winter resort for wealthy patrons, the Alcazar closed down in 1932. It sat unused until 1947, when it was bought and then converted into the museum that we see today. When we look through the oldest photographs of St. Augustine, Florida, we see what was a small community packed into these pockets of fortifications, different store forts, and then rudimentary or makeshift buildings on top. We see a community that was then transformed by the late arrival of the Industrial Revolution alongside Henry Flagler. And then the architecture that rises is all but old world in its grandeur. It's absolutely beautiful architecture, Moorish architecture, old world revival architecture, if you want to call it that. But we see that this area transformed so rapidly that we have to ask the question, what existed in St. Augustine before the advent of photography? What would we have seen in this area in the 1700s, in the 1600s, in the 1500s, when this landscape was ruled by massive indigenous dome buildings? Again, I would love to hear your thoughts and ideas in the comment section down below. I thank you so much for all the thoughts and the prayers in the last few videos, as I've been going through a very difficult time, but it's with your reassurance that the work I'm doing is making a difference. It's with our research, helping out one another, that all of this is possible. My channel would not be possible without you. So I can't wait to hear what you think down below, and I can't wait to talk to you on the next video. If I don't talk to you before then, have a beautiful new year, y'all.